Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Mike and, like a lot of people, I've often dreamed about one day becoming a writer. I've tried a number of different things over the last few years to try and improve my writing, including taking part in the National Novel Writing Month Challenge. Last year I finished my third NaNoWriMo and I thought I'd talk about my experience, partly to help you decide whether or not the challenge is right for you. I'll go through some of the specific lessons that I learnt from NaNoWriMo in a future video, but in this video I'm going to talk about what it was like to take part in the challenge, tell you how I got on, and try to give you some tips for beating it. So, for those who don't know, National Novel Writing Month takes place each November, and the challenge is to write 50,000 words in just 30 days. That's 1,667 words per day, which is a lot of words, and I can tell you that it is definitely a challenge. But having won NaNoWriMo twice now, I can also tell you that it is an achievable one. There's more to it than that. The NaNoWriMo website is a community and a collection of resources, guides, pep talks designed to help and encourage you in your writing. They do additional challenges, boot camps and other events, and I highly recommend checking it out. If you're interested, the link is in the description. So, I've been writing as a hobby for a while. I've got a few short stories under my belt, some of which have even been shortlisted in competitions. I've also tried to write a couple of novels before, but never actually managed to finish one. Then, in October 2019, I had an idea for a brand new story. Characters and scenes started popping into my head, and so I began making notes. But rather than starting to write straight away, I decided to wait, knowing that the NaNoWriMo challenge was just a few weeks away, and resolved to give it a go. I thought it might be fun and, if nothing else, a good writing exercise. And so, with some very rough notes, a vague outline, and a few scene ideas in my head, I waited eagerly and anxiously for November to roll around. And so, on the 1st of November 2019, I sat down to begin writing a brand new novel. It was a daunting task, but I grabbed my laptop, turned off the TV, left my phone somewhere out of reach, put on some music, made myself a cup of tea, and got started. Fortunately, I had a clear idea of how I wanted to begin. I knew I needed a strong opening scene and that I wanted to introduce the antagonist straight away. So I just sat down and started writing. After about an hour, the first chapter of the story was written. I checked my word count to find that I had written just over 2,000 words, which was much more than I actually needed to write for the challenge. It was only day one, but I was off to a good start. This brings me on to my first tip, which is to have at least a vague idea of where you want your story to begin when you start writing. Now, everybody is different. Some people love to plan the whole thing out first, while others prefer to fly by the seat of their pants. But either way, it can be surprisingly daunting to find yourself staring at a blinking cursor on a blank screen, and the only way to beat any challenge is to be ready, willing and able to take that first step. On day 2 I didn't actually have any time to write because I had made plans with my wife, but I wasn't too worried because I was already ahead on my word count. Which leads me on to my second tip. You don't have to hit your target every single day to reach your goal, and you shouldn't beat yourself up if you miss the odd day here and there. Life, after all, has a habit of getting in the way. Just dust yourself off and try again tomorrow. This is also helpful advice for more general long-term goals like boosting your step count or losing weight, but I digress. Over the next few days I was sure to make time to write, usually about an hour per day, usually in the evenings. I didn't worry too much about hitting the word count or updating my progress every day. There are badges for doing so, achievements that you can unlock on the NaNoWriMo website, and part of me was slightly gutted not to get all of them. But I just focused on the main goal. Each day I wrote until I reached a convenient chapter ending, got tired or ran out of inspiration. Then I put it down, walked away, and came back to it the next day. Not every day was plain sailing. By the middle of the challenge I was starting to struggle. There were days where I was tired or lacked motivation. There were a couple of days where I barely wrote anything or only wrote 600 or 700 words. But there were other days where I felt alert and inspired when I wrote over 2,500 words. Sometimes I had to force myself to write more words each day than I felt able to before I gave up, but I persevered. I ended up working almost entirely from the beginning to the end of the story, rarely going back to edit anything that I'd written, which is something that has always tripped me up in the past. I just ploughed on, writing the next bit and the next bit, only backtracking occasionally to make notes or if there was an entire extra scene that needed to be added earlier on in the story. Which leads me on to tip number 3. With NaNoWriMo you have targets to hit, and editing your writing just doesn't give you the same kind of word count as writing new material. You need that high word count in order to succeed in the challenge, and so you're forced to just keep writing. You don't have time to fiddle with stuff you've already written, which is good because doing so just slows you down and interrupts your progress through the story. The last few days were definitely the hardest. I found myself approaching the end of the story knowing there wasn't really enough content left to actually hit the target. So I spent a bit more time reading back through bits I'd already written, trying to add in extra scenes, characters or subplots. This is more time consuming, and I was taking closer to 2 hours than 1 on average, but I think it ultimately improved the story and enabled me to keep moving towards my goal. Eventually, with 1 day to spare, I hit the 50,000 word target and, by coincidence more than anything, also finished writing the final chapter and epilogue of the story. The first draft of Untitled Fantasy Novel was complete. I genuinely wasn't sure if I would have it in me, but I'd done it. I hit my target. I had won my first NaNoWriMo and I was feeling very pleased with myself. Now, as great as that achievement was, one thing that I should emphasise is that I did not, and still do not, have a finished manuscript. What I had was a first draft. It was a mess. There was, and still is, a lot of work to do to turn it into a finished novel. But, as Terry Pratchett said, the first draft is just you telling yourself the story. The first draft doesn't have to be good, it just needs to be finished. And that is what NaNoWriMo helped me to achieve, something that I've never been able to do before, a complete story written from beginning to end. And by doing so, I had a much better idea of what the story was actually about, as well as what was missing and what needed to be changed or fixed to, hopefully, make it work. And I'd done it all in just 4 weeks. I went on to attempt NaNoWriMo again in 2020, also endeavouring to write a brand new novel, but for various reasons, I knew it would be impossible in the circumstances. But I still set myself a goal of 25,000 words and managed to achieve it, again writing a complete, if skeletal, first draft of a sequel to the first novel. Then in 2021 I took on the challenge again, and now I have a finished draft of Volume 3 in the Untitled Fantasy series, and a second NaNoWriMo win under my belt. Not only did I beat the challenge, but I feel like I learned a lot from it. I'm going to discuss that in more detail in a separate video. Subscribe if you want to be notified when it gets published, or if it's already up, the link will be on screen and in the description. But in brief, having to write so much so fast forced me to try new things, develop new techniques and think about writing differently, something that I like to think has made me a better writer. In summary then, the NaNoWriMo challenge is, well, challenging, but I managed to complete it, as have many other people. And if I can make a reasonable attempt at doing it while holding down a job in lockdown with a new baby, then you can too. I now have 3 complete novel drafts, and I've been going through, editing and rewriting them in what little spare time I seem to have these days, all of which is experience that will hopefully make me a better writer, even if the stories themselves never actually see the light of day. Now, I completely admit that it may not be for everyone. You might not enjoy it, or it might clash with your way of writing. Like most things, it's down to personal preference, but I still maintain that it is one of the best things that I have ever done to improve my writing, and it may just do the same for you. So that was my experience of taking part in the NaNoWriMo challenge. I told you a little bit about what it was like and shared some of my key tips for surviving it. Links to their website are in the description, and the follow-up video where I talk about some of the specific lessons I learned from taking part in NaNoWriMo will be posted in the next couple of weeks. I hope you found this interesting. Remember to like this video if you did, it really does help me out. Also, have you taken part in NaNoWriMo? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Do you have any tips or coping strategies for getting through it? Let me know in the comments. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video.